Fake news is a term that almost none of us had heard of 10 years ago, but in the past few years, it's certainly become a part of daily language, daily vocabulary for anybody who follows politics or the news. Let's take some time to talk about what fake news really is, how we can prepare ourselves against it. Let's start off by talking about what we really mean by fake news. I think most of us probably heard Donald Trump using this term. He coined it or at least popularized it during his presidency. But he generally used that term to describe news that wasn't fake, but just something that opposed his viewpoints or exposed the lies that he was pushing out. In reality, fake news refers to disinformation that is intentionally developed and distributed in order to deceive the public. So when Trump saw a report by CNN or the Washington Post, or pick out whichever of his journalistic opponents that he would key on, that called out a lie or inaccuracy that he may have said in a press conference, he would call that fake news. But that wasn't fake news. That was just them reporting something that he didn't like. It's usually, real fake news is usually done to increase support for one's political interest or a special interest cause. Cornell University expands on this idea by pointing out that fake news isn't news you disagree with. It's content generated by non-news organizations to drive eyeballs to ads, e.g. clickbait, or to spread false information such as rumors, conspiracy theories, junk science, or propaganda. This is a really great graph in terms of illustrating just how prominent this term has become recently and how it really didn't exist much before. This is from Google Trends, which, if you're not familiar with this, Google makes public trending data showing how often people are searching for terms over time, and so that you can see when something becomes more or less popular, right? So if something's talked about more in the news, you'd be able to see a spike in that term. If an athlete wins a championship, you're going to see him become more popular on searches for that reflected in this, right? If an actress has a new movie come out, you're going to see her name searched for more often, so she'd have a spike here over time. This particular graph is showing back, into the 2000s searches for the term fake news, and you can see that the term is very sparsely used here up until we get up to around the Trump presidency, at which point it shoots up. So the concept of fake news certainly isn't new, but interest in it coincided with Trump's presidency, partially because he was constantly using the term, partially because he and others around him were constantly creating fake news to support their ideologies. You have probably heard the term propaganda used. That was certainly, a term that might have been used for fake news in the past. There's many ways that you could define propaganda because it can take on a lot of different forms. It's certainly changed over time. But one definition that really jumped out to me as being effective was the dissemination of ideas or images that are intended to convince people to think or act in a particular way or for a particular purpose. The use of propaganda dates back decades. It spans everything from posters to broadcast media. Propaganda has especially been prevalent in times of war. When you hear that term, you probably do think of Nazi propaganda, right? Things around World War II, World War I. But propaganda certainly lived elsewhere. During communist accusations in the United States decades ago, propaganda certainly had a place anytime that somebody's got political interest that they want to advance. Fake news is really just a modern spin on propaganda with a particular emphasis on using modern technologies like social media, like website publishing platforms to spread disinformation at scale, which means, when we're saying at scale, meaning instead of trying to, convince one person that your conspiracy theory is true, that your lie is true, social media and web publishing platforms allow you to tell hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all at once your disinformation, making it incredibly powerful for those who are trying to push fake news out there. Let's talk about what fake news looks like, right? There's three places that you're commonly going to see fake news manifest itself. One is in social media, memes that are using humor and outrage to spread disinformation across social media. Videos are certainly a preferred way to engage with social media content, which make them a really popular and easy way for fake news to be shared. fake websites. There's websites that are created to look like real news sites, but aren't at all. And they're able to use website publishing tools to easily create very professional looking websites that would, again, otherwise seem like a real news site, but actually contain story after story that's inaccurate and easily debunked, easily disproven. And then there's also legitimate websites, right? So sites like CNN and Fox News are run by legitimate news organizations, but politicians and their supporters often accuse them of promoting fake news. In some instances, there is some validity to that, right? Where you can see political bias detected in stories. The claims are often baseless and motivated by political disagreements, but definitely don't just assume that because a website carries the CNN or Fox News brand name or something that you may feel based on your political leanings is an accurate and reliable website. Don't take that at face value. Understand that there could always be political bias in reporting. Let's take some time to break down some fake news examples. Here is an article, or a post rather, on Facebook that leads to an article posted by the Conservative Tribune Western Journal. We've got a headline here: American veterans are waiting 10 years for the service Democrats voted to give illegal immigrants within 90 days. We've got a big picture of Nancy Pelosi here. And this story is completely untrue. There's nothing to this. It's suggesting that Democrats were trying to give illegal aliens medical coverage that U.S. veterans were being denied at the same time. The post is clearly aimed at conservatives who are notoriously passionate in their support of veterans, which is a great thing, but also their opposition of illegal immigration, and in some cases, immigration in general. The post shows, as I mentioned, Nancy Pelosi, a political figure that many, if not the vast majority of conservatives have, dislike or even disdain for. The creators pulled all of these elements together because they knew that these three hot button topics: one, the idea that veterans were being disrespected and denied something that they should get; two, the idea that immigrants were getting something that this audience would think they shouldn't; three, that this would have something to do with Nancy Pelosi, someone that this audience already doesn't like. They put that triad of hot button topics together because they know that that's going to elicit an emotional reaction, whether it's true or not. The site that's linked in this Facebook post is called the Western Journal. The site caters to conservatives, and the information that I'm sharing here, this is all easily Googleable. I'd never heard of the Western Journal before seeing this example here, and within just a few minutes of Googling, I was able to learn the challenges of this site, and I mention that because you can do the same thing in your own practice, right? If you're seeing a site, a news source that you're unfamiliar with, you can Google, and 9 times out of 10, within a few minutes, you're going to be able to tell if they're reputable, if they're politically biased, if they've been set up to distribute fake news. So again, the name of this site, just Western Journal, feels like it could fit with any independent news outlet, right? Western just simply refers to geography, and journal is a common name used by newspapers and other websites. So it feels on the surface like something reputable and that could be impartial. But the site's reputation for distributing fake news was so bad that in 2017, Google, Facebook, and Apple News all stopped including it on their news sites. So you wouldn't be able to find anything from this publisher on the news feeds of those major platforms because their reputation for pushing out fake news was so bad. But before that happened, they had amassed enough traffic from its social posts that they were outranking reputable sites like the Wall Street Journal. So everybody knows the Wall Street Journal name, known for good reporting, known for a lot of business reporting, and known to be just generally a factually correct, accurate, reputable website. Well, this site was getting more traffic because it was working within these hot buttons that they knew they could get people to react to. Here's another great example, this one, showing how memes specifically are used to promote disinformation. Here we've got a picture of the actor Tim Allen, and you've got a quote that's being attributed to Tim Allen that says, "President Trump's wall costs less than the Obamacare website," with website circled to really underscore that. Let that sink in, America, right? So again, catering to a conservative audience that they know is highly likely to believe in the importance and validity of Donald Trump's effort to build a wall to stop immigrants from coming across from Mexico, pairing that up with the Obamacare website that was focused on providing health care to folks who weren't otherwise getting it, something that was strongly opposed by many conservatives, and then using an actor, Tim Allen, who, number one, is very well known, right? You may know him as Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story. You may know him from his role on various TV sitcoms, movies. He's certainly someone that a lot of people recognize, but he's also someone who has been identified, by the conservative audience as someone who's been targeted by the media because he has expressed conservative, sympathetic ideas in the past, has, shown affinity for Trump and his policies. So he's someone that this audience would certainly gravitate towards. The exact opposite of what we just saw with Nancy Pelosi. They use Pelosi because they know people hate her and will react very passionately when they see her. They use Tim Allen because they know that this audience likes him a lot and will react in a way to defend him, they can relate to him, etc. So they compound all these emotional elements of something that the audience hates in Obamacare, something they love in Trump's wall, with a person that they love. And they do all that, to make this seem reputable, to make this seem relatable. But it's all really just fake news here. This meme circulated for years. One of Trump's sons, Eric, even shared it out. But, the really amazing thing about this quote is that it did come from a Tim Allen, but not the actor Tim Allen. It's also a factually incorrect quote. The wall, or what Trump did build of the wall, did not cost less than the Obamacare website. So that's not true. It wasn't said by the man who is pictured here, just a man who has the same name. So we've got an untrue quote being attributed to someone who never said it. But for years, again, this circulated with people taking this at face value, believing that it was true, and all kinds of damage being done as it was spread online and people believe this lie. Let's talk about who's creating fake news. Again, there's really two groups: politically motivated people and financially motivated people. Political groups are always looking for ways, to advance their cause effectively. Technology gives them ways to disguise their partisan messages as impartial reporting. It's an important idea to keep in mind. Financially motivated people, highly trafficked websites can be big business. When you've got a website that lots of people are coming through on, you can sell ads to marketers and advertisers for more than websites that don't have as many people coming through. Fake news creators, they'll place ads on those sites. And again, the more traffic they get, the more they can charge for them. And the more outrageous the fake news story is, the more traffic they'll generate, right? If you see a headline that is just unbelievable, and you see a headline that's pretty believable and kind of pedestrian, which one do you think you're more likely to share, right? You're probably going to share the one that is sensational, outrageous, unbelievable, not necessarily thinking of the repercussions, but the reality is most people are going to share that out more often. That's going to lead to more traffic coming through to these websites and just give these website owners more reason to create bigger, bolder lies. So you're hearing all this, you've seen some examples, and you're saying, how can I protect myself against fake news? Fake news and disinformation, they're all around us, and that's not going to change anytime soon, right? At no point in this presentation or any of the other presentations on this site will you hear it said, that fake news can be eliminated. The websites like Facebook and Twitter, they're taking steps to address the issue, which is great, right? They're trying to get people who are lying that they know of, that are public figures, off of their websites, deplatforming people like Trump, trying to kick, fake news creators off whenever they can. But there's so many people creating so much of this content, and those people have so much to gain monetarily or politically from spreading this disinformation. And it's so easy for them to do that there's just no way that these social media platforms, that Google, et cetera, can keep up with the volume that's being created. So if we can't stop the spread of fake news altogether, which we can't, we need to work to try to identify it, dismiss it, and also important, educate the people around us about it. So again, how can you protect yourself against fake news? Here's some tips to help recognize fake news and disinformation when you see it. Number one, the more sensationalistic a headline is, the more likely the story is to be at least partially incorrect or exaggerated, right? Here's another example. Ilhan Omar, senator, that is unfortunately unfairly targeted by a lot of conservatives, because of her ethnic background. This is saying that she's holding secret fundraisers with Islamic groups tied to terror. Fake news is often an exercise in tapping into the fears of the audience it speaks to. So the creators of this particular content, they know that the audience has a disdain for Omar. They know that that audience in general may not like Islamic groups, and they know that terror is going to scare that audience and give them, a reason to click through that. So when you see headlines that are referencing terror, extremist groups, and then tying public figures to that, you're really seeing a red flag that the story that's going to accompany that is highly unlikely to be true. Look at the domain a site is hosted on. Is it on a .com or at least something like a .org or maybe even a .net? Or does it have some sort of an extension behind it like .com.co or .com.de? A common trick of those creating and purveying fake news is to use sites, domains that aren't as commonly used. So if you're seeing those stranger variants like that, or you're seeing a URL shortener used, that could be a tip-off that you're not actually on a reputable website. Here's an example of a site that's called the News Examiner. That certainly could sound like a real news website. But the fact, tip-off number one is that it's got this .net domain extension. And then you can see the story itself, a complete fabrication of a story saying that there was a head transplant that occurred. Easily disprovable story. You can Google it in seconds and see that it's not real. And this is a great example of fake news that isn't politically motivated, but is out there because it will generate clicks and in turn ad revenue and whatnot from this effort. And again, first good tip off that this is not real, even before you got to this sensationalist, ridiculous story, was the .net domain extension. So watch out for things like that. Look out for other obvious red flags like grammatical errors, misspellings, and especially in prominent areas like headlines. There's also a great resource called whois.com, and you can look up who owns a website. So if you compare the Whois data that we've got screenshotted here for CNN versus the News Examiner owner, with CNN, you can see that the website is owned by the Turner Broadcasting System, right? A reputable name that you can confirm is a real company that exists at one CNN center in Atlanta, Georgia, has, telephone numbers that you could call were you so inclined and speak to someone there. Whereas the News Examiner is using domains by proxy, which is a service that exists to hide the owners of websites. There are perfectly legitimate people using domains by proxy, so this is not a criticism of that service, but it is more, again, this is a red flag that you can use to start investigating whether this is a legitimate site or not. And you can see here, they've just got the domains by proxy address. If someone seems to be hiding something, there may very well be a good reason that they're doing so. Beware of websites that borrow from the names of reputable websites. Common fake news approaches are things like breaking-cnn.com. Well, that's not really affiliated by cnn.com. Bloomberg.ma, cbsnews.com.co. Those are all real sites that have existed that have been called out for being fake news sites. They trade off of the names of brands that you're familiar with for delivering legitimate news and fool the public that way. Scrutinize those really heavily. Another good tip, look to see if a story has an author that's listed. If there's no author listed, that might be an indicator that a story is fake. And again, search engines are our friends. I've mentioned here a couple of different times that a lot of this information, you can Google it and figure out if there's any validity to it in just a few minutes, or to find problems with websites in just a few minutes. You can also find out if news site has ties to another business that might be influencing it, or that an author or owner of a site might have, some ties that would give it a financial or political reason to publish some fake news. So look for those sorts of connections. Search the author's name. Where else have they written and published things? Who else have they written for? Have they posted things on social media that have a clear political bias? All big red flags that you can look for and find pretty quickly. More tips here. Consider the source of the story and what they might have to gain if the story is true. If the story sounds, sensationalistic, scary, etc., think about who's writing it and what they could gain from it. Rely on friends and family. If you're not sure about an article or a meme's validity, show it to somebody that you trust, whether that's a friend, a close family member, and try to get their opinion on it, see what they think. There's lists of fake news websites out there, right? So there's a couple listed here: Snopes, Wikipedia, and there's lots of others out there. You can just Google, list of fake news websites, and they have started to list out some of the common offenders here. There's so many of these sites out there that none of these lists can be comprehensive, but it's at least a good starting point to try to check some of this out. And then another good tip: check sources within an article. If an author is telling you about something that happened, they should be referencing who they talked to, who they got quotes to, in order to get their information. And then you can check and see, are those reputable sources, or are there any sources, that are listed at all? Are those real people that are being cited or not? Concluding thoughts on this topic: knowledge is your best defense against fake news. Unfortunately, fake news is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It will continue to be something that we all have to fight against in order to maintain democracy, in order to maintain a free society. But knowledge is really the key to combating it. Knowing that fake news exists, knowing what it is, knowing how to spot fake news, or at least being skeptical of what you're looking at, knowing how to apply the steps that were mentioned earlier in this presentation to analyze and detect fake news, and know that you should share your learnings with those around you to help protect everyone from disinformation. We've mentioned a few times, if you've viewed or listened to the other presentations here on the site, that media literacy is just not something that's being taught in most schools. It's not something that most people are having a lot of exposure to. So now that you're gaining a good foundation of what media literacy is, what to look for, in terms of avoiding fake news and disinformation, take that knowledge and share it with others. Fix this issue for yourself, and then help others get more educated on it as well. It'll be a great way for you to help out those around you.